Okay, today more Dreamweaver, and as I mentioned, what I had originally planned on doing, and I'm going to postpone it a little bit and ask that you look at this on your own for a while, is that on my website that I have for the class, if you click on Art 180 or 196 assignments, and you look at the files it can download, the last one, best practices, if you would on your own just go ahead and download that. It's a PDF file. We'll save it to disk. And then I'll go ahead and open it up. And you'll see it's a little slide presentation, and it's taken from a webinar that I was invited to a while ago. It was very effective. Come on, let's open it up. I don't want the new version. Keeps asking me to download it. I don't want it. Come on. I don't want professional. I don't want anything else. Let me try again. Open with stuff at Expander. That's what I want. Not now. So it's supposed to open it. So let me find stuff at Expander, and I'll just open it from here. There we go. Now it's open. Now I can take the web best practices and open it there. Let's take it here. Oh, I have it hidden. I've opened it how many times here? It's only one file. It isn't all of those. Anyway. In terms of what you should be thinking about when you design your website and build it, this has been very helpful, I think. It's something that really talks about things that I had known for some time, but it's in a very organized and condensed manner. So it was set up actually, or most of the talking was by Bill Cullifer, the executive director of the World Organization of Webmasters, so it really is, he's of the know. And yeah. So technology news, trends, best practices, and so on. He talks about page layout. He talks about browser compatibility, things that we need to talk about. Your navigation, color and graphics. If you incorporate multimedia, content presentation, and that's pretty much it. So in those basic categories, it's not super long, and it's definitely worth looking at. Okay. So that is something that I will talk about Thursday. But what I do want to talk about today is that I'm going to show you in CS3, based on what I started, that I have the shell of a website. So let's design our home page. So I want to do three things. I want to show you how to insert text, basic text, insert graphics, which would be a photograph typically, and then various ways of laying out your page. not using CSS. Then after the break, meaning not the break today or coffee break, but the spring break, when they've installed CS4, I'll reintroduce that layout again, but you'll be using CSS, and we'll follow the textbook, because that's the direction that web design has gone. So you can still do both. They're still available. But if you want to follow the trend, layout using CSS is the way to go. And the way they're teaching it now, that I've kind of gleaned from the textbook that you'll see, is that you may have noticed a bunch of different templates that are available. That when you create a new page, you use HTML, and then you select, okay, I want to use one of these CSS templates. 1 column, 2 column, 3 column. Is it flexible? Is it static? Is it, so on and so forth. And you pick that template. And it has dummy text. It has a fundamental layout in there. It has default colors, so on and so forth. So it gives you the basic structure of the page using CSS. And then you go back in and you begin to integrate your images. If you want to customize the background, as a background color, use background image. If you want to customize the text, so on and so forth, you create CSS rules to modify it, but the structure of the page stays intact. Okay, the way I'm going to show you today, which is now seems like back in the day, but it's only between CS3 and CS4, I think a more flexible way of laying out a page. It's a bit more intuitive the way you would lay out a page, almost like the way you would lay out a page in InDesign or Quark Express or Photoshop or Illustrator. And you can still do both. Mm-hmm.
Can you still do both in CS4?
Yes. The only thing that you can't do, as you say, they removed layout, but I got to check. There are some things that maybe other things that they've eliminated too, because they don't call them layers anymore. They call them AP divs. So, still had even in CS3. I'll show you. That's what I want to do now, is to show you how the various ways of laying out a page. Okay, to structure it. Because you may have already noticed if you tried to type on the page, you either have, it shoves it all the way over to the left, or you have it centered or flushed, or it's to the right. How do you structure it? So if we want to place something in the upper left-hand corner or the lower right-hand corner or something, how do you organize these elements and have them stay put? In web design using HTML, it's not that simple. There are usually very limited choices, and you have to either structure it using tables, layers, or CSS in order to hold these elements in place.
Yeah, I just had to go down and click the CSS.
Huh?
I had to click the CSS to do that, to center or anything when I was in the properties panel in CS4. You have a little button on the left that says HTML, and then if you type in text and you wanted to move it over, there's another button where you click CSS.
Mm-hmm.
And
then you add a rule, or if one does not exist, then you have to add a rule or you apply a rule. So if you've looked, and I guess before I close the website, another place I encourage you to go, and there are some really interesting things that are being done with CSS, but they take a lot of work. So, to give you an idea, if you go to, now I can't think of what it is, CSS Zen Garden. And you'll see it's, I guess I should give you a little bit of info about this. There are 3 basic elements that go into web design. There is the HTML, which is your content. Okay? There is CSS now, which controls the way you view the content. It controls the visual element. It controls the color of the text, the style of the text. It controls the background color, positioning if you're using layout, so on and so forth. So that's the second element. And the third functionality would be JavaScript. Okay? And typically there are applets that are used to allow for rollover functionality and things like that that are behind the scenes, that are behaviors, that are still, you do not have to program anymore. And that was, I hope they don't go back to that, because when I was first learning web design, even in version 1 of Dreamweaver, if you wanted a simple rollover, you would have to write the JavaScript in there to do that. And it was a real pain. You don't have to do that anymore for a simple rollover. You know. So anyway, I was saying that for different kinds of layouts, you'll see that this is really quite nice. Pretty standard, CSS Zen Garden. And it gives you the option in all of these layouts. See, we can also look down here. Here's Under the Sea by Eric Stoltz. We can click that. So here's another one. It's the same content, but looks totally different. And what they give you is that you can download the page, you can download the content, and you can also download the CSS and see what it looks like. Okay. For example, it says view this design CSS. So we'll click here. So here are all the rules that they created for that page. Now, from a designer's point of view, from a programmer's point of view, they're probably in hog heaven. You know, like this is incredible. From a designer's point of view, it's like, this is a nightmare. This is not, I'm a visual person. This is not something I want to do. But it is what it is. Okay. So let's go back. Let's start. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open my index page. And I'm going to show you, this is what I had before. I'm going to go ahead and here, and I'm going to center this as well, just for the heck of it. This is what I had before. So if I wanted, for example, to edit the text, or what you may have noticed, add text. We'll just start by that. It works very similar to when you're adding it in HTML to a word processing program. You click on the page, you see the little flashing cursor, and you begin to type. And if you're looking at the page in split view, you can see in here, and for example, if I highlight Lauren's website, and you'll see, here it is, okay? It's highlighted. There's Lauren's new website. Now you'll notice at the beginning here that it is using CSS, and it has done this for quite a while, but this is embedded. It's aligned. It's actually in here. You'll see here where it says H1 align equals center, strong. That gives you all the information about what's going on here. It says it's an H1 tag. It tells me that it's centered. Strong means bold. And it gives us the span class, or the class is style 1. Now, it's already assigned a style name to this. Every time you add text and you change its visual properties, it will automatically add a CSS style to it here. But the downside to it initially is that, again, if we look at CSS styles in the upper hand right here, you'll see here's style 1, and if we pull down here, we can look at, you know, all properties here, and you can see here it's just the font family. It's Verdana, Arial, Helvetica. That's the only thing that we've changed. We can add another attribute to it and change the color of it, change the font, do all sorts of stuff from here. Okay, and so whenever we choose to use an H1 tag or style 1, it will be in this format. Later on another day, what we'll do is when we create all of our styles and you want to apply them to a separate page, we will export them. And then what we'll do is we'll link that style sheet to the page, and then it will allow us to create new pages and link those style sheets, and then you won't have to keep recreating those styles. So that's where it is advantageous. And when you change a style, it automatically propagates across everywhere it's been used, so then you don't have to remember, did I change this thing on this page? It automatically is changed. So that is a true advantage. For page layout, I'm not quite so sure, because each page tends to be a little bit different. All right. So to add text, again, you simply click where the cursor, and you'll see the cursor. Well, let's look down here. We have format, and we have none, or we have paragraph, which is default, or we have headings 1 through 6. Headings, as I understand it, it's almost like headline, subhead, body copy, so on. But where the real use of them comes into play is for people who have disabilities, who don't see well, and they have a reader that when they go to a particular website, reads the page to them. And if you have an H1 tag or a heading 1, it will emphasize that text differently than an H3 tag. So they will be able to hear the distinction. We see a distinction. You see it larger, bolder. They hear large, bold. It doesn't say large, bold, and I don't know I don't think it's louder. Just by shouting it doesn't make it important, but they hear a difference, and I've never heard that myself, but that's what I understand. So if you had an H6 tag and it's a tiny little snippet of text in the bottom right-hand corner that maybe is a caption or something, then they would know, okay, this is what I'm looking at or what I'm hearing. It's a caption of the text. So that's what those relate to. Then we have the fonts that we can choose, and this is, for most designers, a nightmare. They're categories. We can leave the default font, and the default font refers to the default font that your computer is using, and that's usually Times Roman or something like that. You also have these other categories. We have sans serif type, and it will pick first Arial, which is a bastardization of Helvetica. If your computer does not have Arial, then it will switch to Helvetica, and if it has neither, then it will just pick an arbitrary default sans serif typeface. So you have to build some flexibility into your website when you use text and HTML. Then we have the other options, which are very similar. You can select Times New Roman, Times, or serif. Courier, which is a monotype, mono spacing font. Like the old typewriters, then an I took up the same width as a W. Does that make sense? But you would think intuitively that an I would take less space than a W, and with the other fonts, they do. But Courier, which looks like an old square serif typeface that you would see with a typewriter, a traditional typewriter. Does anybody still have one? That's what that appears to be. And then we have others that are similar categories. My favorite is Verdana. I like Verdana a lot for the web. It's just my bias, but if I'm going to use any of these, for sans serif typeface, and I am prejudiced towards sans serif specifically for not headlines, but for body copy, and I'll explain why in a minute. I really like Verdana. It's a nice, clean typeface that reads really well on a monitor. And the key word is monitor, because that's how web pages are meant to be viewed. Okay. In print, sans serif type reads best in most instances when you have body copy. That's why newspapers continue to use serif typefaces. It's not because part of it is tradition, but the tradition has arisen or developed out of the fact that those little serifs add to the legibility of the type. that make it easier to read, especially when there's a lot of type, a big block of type that you have to read. There are a handful of publications that arose, I think, in the 70s maybe, like People magazine. It was late 70s, early 80s. And I think People magazine used Helvetica for quite a while. It was 8-point. They kept it small, and that was unheard of. But in order to have large blocks of text, what they did is they added the leading, meaning the space between the lines, to make it easier on the eye and more legible. And it was just a different look. So in print, that was the rule of thumb. And for headlines, subheads, you could use serif, sans serif. You could use special decorative fonts, whatever you want, whatever suited it best. For the web, I think it's almost the reverse. That, at least for the body copy, you know, a large blocks of text, because you're viewing it at screen resolution, which is either 72 pixels per inch or 96, depending on which platform you're on. That's pretty low resolution, and those little serifs can break up, and especially when it's small text. And it doesn't, for myself, it's not very legible. It's harder to read. That's just and I don't see real well these days, so that's my personal experience. You might discover something a little bit different. So that's why I am biased towards sans serif on the web for large blocks of text. Okay? So you really have limited choices. You can come in here and you can edit the font list, and you can put in there whatever you want, anything that's on your computer. But be aware that when you do that, if the person at the other end doesn't have it, then it substitutes. So you're strongly encouraged to use just these fonts for HTML text, and strongly discouraged from using anything else. If you do want to use something that is more decorative, that if you want to use script or something like that, then what you have to do is either use Fireworks or you have to use Photoshop, and you create an image of that text, something that is non-editable, that will either be in a GIF, PNG, or JPEG file format. And you place the image of the text in there. So it's non-editable, so that the end user sees an image. So I would reserve that for headlines. I would reserve that for special text, subheads maybe, buttons, but not for a big block of text. You could conceivably use it for a big block of text, but this is the downside. That, again, if you want to reach the widest audience, you have to design for the lowest common denominator. And again, refer to people with disabilities. If they can't see the image, how are they going to know what's in there? So if you use a big block of text, and we'll get to this when we insert images, you have to insert something called an alt tag. And there, in the properties panel down below here, there will be a place for that, where you'll select the image and it'll say, here's an alt tag. And the alt tag is a brief description of what it is that's there. You can also put in a URL. So what if it is a big block of text, if it's a SWF file or something that a person who is seeing impaired cannot, you know, their reader cannot detect what's there, or if it's a big picture that requires some explanation, it can send them to a URL with text, you know, a HTML page that their reader can read and they can understand what's there. So that you can see that that will require a lot of additional work, a lot of work.
So it involves transferring to another page?
Correct. They would go to it.
There's no one-to-one connection?
No.
Okay.
That's if you use especially a big block of text that was an image. How would they be able to, how would they know what's on that page? Alt tags are short, but if you wanted a broader, an entire description of everything that's there, then there will be a place where you can actually put in a separate page, a URL for them to go to. And then you would just use a generic or the default text and it would read it to them. But that gets complicated and awkward, and it gets very ugly. So you want to limit it. But you know, if you have a very narrow audience and the only people that are going to see your website are literally people who are going to see the website, and it's going to be an art director or something, then maybe that's a non-issue for you.
It's like funny that the old tag would be the entire text of my text block with different.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarro. So you can see here we have, as far as style, I have none. So if I type, you know, more text, this is just the default. But if I highlight this, and you'll see I already used, for my headline, I have style 1. So if I select style 1, okay, and hold on here, and I type this again, wait a minute. Oh, that's a paragraph. Never mind. So I didn't add one. Style 1 is that. Notice that it did change it to the Verdana. Okay, that was one I thought I had when I used a different one. I did. But if I go back and I highlight it, and I switch and I select none, notice it goes back to the serif typeface. So you'll see a whole list of styles here that it automatically adds, and it also automatically puts them in line. And as you're building, as you decide and you create new ones, you'll have, you could use an H1 heading, maybe not. You can specify a size. And this is where it really gets awkward. You can, and for web, you can specify point sizes. You can also just specify extra small, 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 medium, and large. And when we get into CSS, it can be done in M's, meaning in percentages of the default size that you've used. So it's all relative in the sizing. And every time you change these, then a new style is developed. And you can go ahead and open the CSS panel here, which was already open a moment ago. Okay? So we look at all, and it will show you the summary of the ones that you're making. So it's automatically adding CSS to it as you do it. You also have a typical faux bold and faux italic. And this is where it gets really awkward too. You'll notice that we have here, this is for page layout. I can either make it flush left, centered, flush right, or justified. And some of them don't look much different. That's not much of a choice. You also have the opportunity down here to select the color, okay, for the text. And again, you're restricted to the hexadecimal numbers, or the web-safe colors as they're also called. You can also select here for your text an unordered list. You have ordered lists. You can also have outdents and indents for your text from here. Minimal, but you know, it's not the same controls that you would have in InDesign or Quark Express. It's very basic. You know, and you can also turn this into a link. So if I type here, if I type Kmart66, and I want to turn this into a link, you highlight it. And now I can go over here where the link is, and I can either type in the absolute address or the relative address. The absolute address is http:// whatever it is. Okay? The whole shooting match. The relative link, it means that if it is contained within my root folder. So from here, you'll notice I just have, this is my about, is the only other one that I have opened. I can select that. If I have my pages over here, I also have this little target that I can link to. So let's go back to Window, and I have files. Let's bring this open, and let's close it over here. So here are all of my files. So I don't want to view map, I just want to local view here. Here are all my files. I can click the target, and what if I want it to link it to my portfolio page? And it links it. You drag it, just as we did with the site map, which I don't know that I mentioned is no longer exists in CS4. That came as a real surprise, because I thought that was one. When I show you some additional tools today, I thought this is the best thing since sliced bread.
That's what I thought was.
The other is you can click here on the folder, and you can pick from any folder you want for a relative link. But in this case, if I put in mine, so if I put in http://kmart66.com, okay, then lo and behold, you'll notice that by default, links are underlined, and that is something that we can change using CSS. We can change the rules. There can be, you can have rollover effects so that when you roll over it, the underline appears, or when you roll over it, a color appears, or a whole host of things. But this is a link now. This will go. And then the last thing that you have to specify is target. By default, when you click on this, it will go to the page, and it will replace the current page with the new page. A quick rule about that. What I recommend is that if you deep link to another person's website, that you do the following, so that the end user is not confused, that you target and you select blank. And what it will do is that it will open a new window. Okay? It's like a pop-up, but it's not. It will just open a new window. Or if you're using tab browsing, it will open a new tab. Now, why would you do that? Because I don't know if you have experienced this, but you've been on a website, gone to a specific website, and you're on there, and you're reading and reading, and then you click on a link, and you're reading and reading, and you click on a link, and you're reading and reading, and suddenly you discover, I'm no longer on the website I thought I was. You're someplace else. Because they deep linked to somebody else's website, not their own. So that's why I would do that. It gives the viewer a visual clue, oh, I've gone someplace else. They still have the window of the one that they were at before, but here's the new one. And when you're done with it, you can leave them both open, or you can close one or the other or both. So I will, just to show you, I'll go ahead and I'll select blank. And it doesn't show anything visual here, but it will in a moment as soon as I test this. So if I save this now and I test this in the browser, let's preview this in Firefox. And now watch. If I click on resume, it just takes me to another page. It's replaced one with another. If I go back to index, I see that. But watch what happens when I click on this one. Because I said, with this link, I wanted a blank. When I click, notice it opens up another one. And now it will take me to that website. So now I have the two to compare. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? I think it makes good sense. I don't know if that's a rule that other people follow or not, but it's one that I thought about a long time ago, and I think other people do the same. Okay? So what if we wanted to create a more dynamic layout, or one that we wanted to scatter elements all over the page? Okay? And as a part of that, what we wanted to do is that we wanted to add an image. I've shown you how to apply some basic text. And what if we wanted to add an image? How do we do that? The easiest way with no other formatting at the moment is that wherever you have the cursor is where the image will be placed. We can place a placeholder image if we wish, or we can, if we know that there's a specific image that we want to place that's in our root folder, or even if it's not, that's been saved properly for the web, remember 72 pixels per inch as a JPEG, PNG, or GIF, then we can place that. To do that, we go up here to our common tools, and you'll see this one with the little tree says image. Now we also have the option of placeholder. Placeholder looks like so. You can give it a name, and we're going to say that this is going to be a duck, because that's what I plan on putting there. And then I can specify I want the duck to be 200 by 200 pixels, because that's how I've laid out my page. We can put a color for this, or we can also specify an alt tag here. Talked about, and we click, and it places a little, that's my placeholder. It's just, as I'm laying it out, I know that that's what I'm going to put in there later on.
Where did you bring that up again?
It's right up here. Under, we have the common tools, and it's right under images. It's placeholder. Okay? And then you can substitute later on. And that's not a bad way to go. The other is that you just select, and I want to select an image. It by default goes to the root folder. Now, this should catch me. I'm going to go ahead to desktop, because what if you've been naughty and you have saved the file somewhere that's not in your root folder. So let's say I have a, here are the duck images I created before. Here's the duck JPEG. And this is probably not, this is not the right size, but it's still, it's a JPEG. It will work. It was saved for web. And I click choose. And now it asks me again, do I want, and this is what I was talking about, an alt tag. So I'll call duck image. And if there was more that need to be described, I could put in a long description and put in an absolute URL here.
Does that help in terms of Google searching?
It might. It wouldn't hurt. Depends on how far down, how embedded it is in your page. Because usually it just hunts, it starts at the top.
But why do you have to rename it? Do you have a name for it?
It's a, well, it tells somebody that what this is. It's an image of a duck.
The name is
It doesn't have to relate. It could be an just picture. I mean, that's what you could have. My, you know, self-portrait. It could, you know, whatever it is. It should be somewhat descriptive of what's there.
Oh, my question really has to do with, since it has a name already, do
You mean the
describe
file name?
describe it so that you can, you know, use it as an instance later? Or
No. This is solely for the purpose of readers. Because there are also other people that, I mean, they can turn off images, that they have no desire to see images, and they just want to see text. Now, for people like myself or Piper, you don't want those people looking at your website, because yours is all about your images. The images. It's not about the text, you know.
Well, sometimes I think if it's a big image, sometimes it takes a little bit of a while to load.
Mm-hmm.
And while it's loading, you have that alt text coming.
You also have another alternative, and I don't know if I mentioned it, and we were the first weeks saving for web under the optimization feature for JPEG. What you can specify, let me open it here. Let me cancel this, or just say OK, and it puts it in there. Ta-da! There it is. Now, if you want to turn the image into a link, you can when you select it. There's a variety of things that we can do, but I'll get to that in a minute, because I'm going to digress for a minute. If I open Photoshop for a moment here. And you save for web, you have an option, and I can't, the reason I'm stalling here is because I can't think of the name right at the moment. But typically, what happens, let me open the file from here. This is awfully sluggish. I think something's going to crash very soon. So let's open. Is that it will not, you cannot see the image Let me just open, it doesn't matter which one it is. Here's my a picture of a flying saucer. And I want to save this for the web. So I make sure that under image, and I go to image size, that it's 72 pixels per inch, and it's a big image. That's fine. But when I go to save for web and devices, and we select JPEG, notice that progressive is selected. If that's not selected, let me explain the difference. If it's not selected, you will not see the image until it's fully downloaded into the browser. So that's where you're saying, you're right, an alt tag might be useful. Progressive does something different, and you may have noticed this, especially for slow connections. For fast connections, you won't see this. But it starts with big chunks, and it looks like big pixels. And as the image is downloading, and more information is there in the browser, locally, that the pixels get smaller and smaller, and the resolution gets finer and finer until you see the entire image. So this is what I would recommend using for large images, is make sure that progressive is checked. And the reason I say that is that when someone looks at your page, they first look at it and get kind of a gestalt, an overall view. But then what they do is that depending on how you have the page laid out, they will read it pretty much like we read a book. They're going to start in the top left-hand corner and read across to the right and then go down and so on and so forth. But depending on the images that you have, if that's a central image, that could be like a target. It could draw their attention. If they see, oh, I see something there, it's kind of a crude image of a duck, okay, I get what it is. And then they move on and they look at the headline, and they read a subhead and some text. And by the time they have quickly glanced at the rest of your page, that image is downloaded, and then they go, oh, there's a nice picture of a duck. But if all they see is a blank, they see the little, you see this in Internet Explorer all the time. You see a little icon with a little symbol where an image is going to be, and as soon as it's done downloading, it pops in there. But I find it annoying to see that empty space. So again, my personal preference from a design point of view for being friendly to the end user, to entice them to stay, which is also important, and stay at your website, would be to use progressive. And that should fix that problem, even if you don't use an alt tag, and you should use an alt tag. So integrating an image is very simple. Notice that we can resize this, but I would not recommend that you do that. Again, it's like cooking, that to do it properly, you need to prepare all of your ingredients ahead of time, especially for complex meals. Because this will work, but the file size is not any smaller. So the download time of your page will remain the same. Does that make sense? It visually is smaller, but the file size is the same. So if you decide later on, I really want it smaller, then take the image and go back to, you can edit the image. In fact, you can now, and they're making it even easier in CS4 to edit the image in Photoshop. You go back and change the edited image, and then when you're done editing it and saving it, it will replace it automatically in here. So they're trying to make it, there are some good things that they're doing, so that they're trying to integrate the different programs that you need to use so that you can seamlessly go back and forth without too much muss or fuss. Yeah.
So when you click that edit button, it'll automatically take you down to the Photoshop file?
With this selected, yes, it should automatically open it up in here. See?
What if you go the other direction and you just have a small file size and you make the image bigger?
No, you won't. You don't do that. That's a big no-no. Then you might have to rescan the image. Remember, with bitmap images, you can make it smaller, and even that you need to be careful, because it will get blurred. It will the edges won't be as crisp. It really requires, again, preparation, that you know in advance about the size that you will need. and err on the side of a little bit bigger, huh?
Start big.
But not too big, but not too big. Meaning, because to take a big image and to shrink it down to a thumbnail will be disastrous too. It will not look very good. I don't remember, did I do a scanning demo in here? No? Okay. Well, if you start scanning your own, if you're starting with digital images, that's one thing. If you're working with the scanner and you're scanning an image and you scan it large and you shrink it down to a thumbnail size, it will look horrible. If you scan it originally and you shrink it down at that time to a small image, it will look great. So that pertains to scanning images. That rule that I'm explaining now, that you never make it bigger. If, on the other hand, if you're starting with a large image that was a digital image to begin with, and that's a different animal, that's different altogether.
Will you give us also a demo on the scanner?
I can, sure. It seems that in this class, so many people just avoid using, that. But if you have your own images and you want to scan them, then that's the way to go. As I said, this can be turned into a link, so you need your property panels. So, you can select the image, and you'll see down here we have link. Again, you can click and drag to a page. You can type in absolute or relative path. You can click on a folder and select for a file. You can specify the target. You can also choose, and I've never done this, a low source image. That adds even more work, so that in the event that that one can't load or there's a substitute, you have a low source image. You can also specify if you want a border. I'm not a big fan of borders from a design point of view. I think they look kind of horsey, clunky, unless they're really thin and elegant. I don't know. They just look horrible. And again, the alignment is relative to the page. It's very basic. And again, you have your left centered right. Okay. Now, class refers to when you start specifying CSS for images. And we're not doing that yet. Another thing, remember in Flash, we had, when we were creating buttons, we had, when we did the invisible buttons, we had and I can't think of it, what is it? The hit state. Well, that's what we're doing now, but it was the hit state, the image for the hit state. Well, now we have something called image maps. So they can be rectangular, elliptical, or they can be polygonal. And I can click here, like so, on this image, and now I can go ahead and I can put in a URL. So maybe if I want to go from here, pound, and maybe let's go to I could go to another page, or I can go to, let's go to my portfolio page. So it goes to portfolio. Okay? So now I've turned just that little surprise area, that little area, into a link. So the whole image can be a link or a specific area. I know I'm going over this fast, but you guys wanted to get to layout. Okay, so what if I want to lay this out a little bit more uniquely? I wanted maybe to place Lauren's new website over to the left. I wanted the duck image to be, maybe that's my logo. I want that to be up there. I wanted this to be to the right. I want my links to be over to the right. I want it all over the place. I'm just a scatter effect. Well, what we can do, and we can switch to layout here, from common to layout. And you'll notice one of the first tags here is draw AP div. AP divs used to be called layers. And if we look at AP elements, you'll see them appear over here. If you don't see that, then go to Window, and you want to see AP divs. Where are the AP elements? There, right here. F2. So let's say, for example, I want the duck to be in the upper left-hand corner. So I'm going to click and drag, and you see this defined by a blue rectangle, a little window. And I can move it by clicking on this little tab in the upper left-hand corner. And I can move it wherever I want on the page. AP, by the way, stands for absolute positioning. I mean, wherever it is wherever it is. Then I can click inside, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the image, and I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to click inside here, and I'm going to paste it. Now I can resize this to absolutely fit the size of the image that I have in there. And I can place this wherever I want. So I'm going to put it up here in the left-hand corner. Now, relative to this, I want Lauren's new website. Maybe I want this all on one line. So I'm going to go like so. And notice how it's overlapping that. Not good. That's one of the downsides to combining AP divs and just HTML. That to keep them separate, you run into problems. So you need to go one way or the other. So what I can do, though, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create another AP div, like so. And I'm going to click and highlight all of this, cut it, click in here, and I'm going to paste it. Now I got to make sure that I highlight it, and it's style 1. I'm going to go ahead and format H1 so that it's big. It's nice and big. Now I need to be careful when you reduce the size of this, that if I shrink it down, notice that it works on, it will reduce it to 2 lines. So I'm going to try to make it as small as I can without it doing that, and then move it in place. So maybe I want to position this like so. Not aligned, but there. Notice that it overlaps the Kmart 66 underneath there. Well, let's highlight that. Let's move this first. Highlight this, and I'll cut this. Now I'm going to move this over on top of it. Let's say I want a place for that Kmart 66. This is going to be a horrible design, but you'll get the idea. Like so. So maybe I want it over here in the right-hand corner. So I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to paste. Now I'll resize it to fit accordingly. And again, I can move this wherever I want on the page. Maybe I want it down here in the lower right-hand corner. Maybe I want all of my links to be over here to the left. So I'm going to cut all of those, and I'm going to create a new div, and I'm going to put it over here like so. And again, I'm intentionally not going to align it. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to paste. And I'm going to put each of these on their own line, like so. I'll resize it, and I'll move it like so. And I'll do one more time. So I'll make another for the more to come soon. Create a new AP div, and I'll put it right here. Cut, paste, resize it to fit. Move it wherever I wish. Can't do this with HTML. I mean, it just doesn't work. Now, I could leave this as is. I don't think that's a wise idea, but I could. So that would be one option. We could go ahead and save it. Can preview in browser. And there you have it. They all stay in place. They're absolutely positioned. And if I shrink my window way down, they stay exactly where they are. They do not move. Absolutely positioned. All these work, just copied and pasted. Now, before CS4, all of last year, last semester, an alternative, and I still think it's not a bad alternative for basic layouts in some instances, is to use tables. Okay? But I don't know how many of you, again, have done HTML? Anybody? You have? A little bit? I mean program? And meaning have you typed in your own table? They can be pretty awkward, pretty complicated. Well, this was the thing that I thought when they first integrated this into Dreamweaver years ago, I thought, they have the designer in mind. This is what they want. Because what if you wanted to put all of this in a table now? And the table could be relative, meaning it could be in a percentage, or it could be fixed. And this is what they had. So this has probably gone away too, but we'll find out in CS4. We'll see. I don't know. So what we can do, and this is what I found so incredible. Okay, so everybody watch. This is what I thought was the way to go. You go to Modify, and you select Convert, and you select AP divs to table. So what it does is it takes all of those layers and it converts it and it turns it into a table. And you say that you want it the most accurate, you know, and in smallest, you know, collapse empty cells. Use transparent GIFs to hold everything in place, and that's something that you used to have to do with tables because tables can work like spandex pants. If there is a cell that is not filled, it shrinks. It needs something there to hold it apart so that you would put a transparent GIF to hold it apart. Awkward, but when you do it this way, dynamite. So watch what happens. I'm going to say prevent overlaps, and I click, boom, there's your table. And I would always challenge my students who thought that they knew HTML really well, and I say, you know what? You write it, you know, I'm going to do my version, and you start writing the code for this. You can't write it that fast. I can also go to Modify, and I can convert, and I can say tables to AP divs. So if I decide I don't like the layout, I want to move it around, it will remove the table and put it back in layers. Now you'll have additional layers because there are layers here that are used to hold where the transparent GIFs are as placeholders. And you just delete those and move it around again and then collapse it to a table. And I thought this was the way to go. This is more like traditional page layout in InDesign or Illustrator or something. That it was with a designer in mind who is visually oriented, who wanted to size and structure their design this way. So this is what I've done for a long time, specifically for basic simple layouts like this, but where it doesn't follow a rigid grid, which is what CSS does. See, and you could do this with CSS, but the time it would take you to do this in CSS, I guarantee you would be a lot longer than what it took me to do this. And I know that tables are not elegant, that there are issues with that, but they do work. Yes, Cindy, you have a question. You can, but I would not do that. Older browsers may not be compatible with them. That they won't view them correctly, that you will have problems. Tables are a non-issue.
Yeah, in that layout, where are the transparent GIFs?
You won't know that until you go backwards. So if I go to Modify and I convert and I select tables to AP and I click OK, see how many different layers I have now? So now I have a total of 20. There's probably one down here. It's this one, and I'll just delete it. 19. See these? It just structures all of these little ones that it had to create, because to use tables, it has to follow a very rigid grid structure.
So those are the names of the transparent GIFs.
Right. They're just inside there, right. And then you select them, and I'm just getting rid of all those extra ones that I don't want. And don't need, but were placeholders. Now, the other way to go in the past, aside from this way of laying out, there's two other ways, in fact. One is to put your elements directly in tables. But they have to follow a very strict, rigid format. so I can do that. Where am I at with time here? I still have 24 minutes. So let me switch gears here and open up a separate page. I'm going to collapse this to a table again, and then I'm going to open up a separate page, and we're going to create another page using tables. Tables traditionally were used to organize data, same way that Excel organizes data in a spreadsheet. But it was discovered when web page design was developing that, hey, these could also serve as a framework, as a structure to hold images, text, links, whatever in place, and hold it there. And that's basically what that's doing when it converts it to a table. But again, tables have fallen into disfavor within the past year or two. So I'll do this again. I'm going to modify, convert, and I'm going to say AP divs to table, and boom, there it is again. And again, when you preview it in Firefox or whatever, I guess I got to save it first. Look at, that it all holds into place beautifully. I'm not restricted by the. Now, what if I wanted one more thing before I move on? See, the thing that you can do with a table that's nice is that, and you can select the table from here, or you can, if I click in here, you'll notice at the bottom, pay attention to what you see down here, that I can select the table row, table data, meaning a single cell, the entire row, or the table from down here. So the whole table is selected. And when the table is selected, you'll notice that I can, it tells you it's 6 rows, 10 columns, and it did that automatically. We can determine the width in pixels, which it does automatically, or you can do a percentage. I would not recommend changing that here, but we will in a moment when we design initially with it. The alignment by default is default, and it's left. What if I center it? So now my page is always in the center, no matter how big or small the browser window is. Okay. With tables, I'll talk more about tables in a minute, but this was, I also thought, was an advantage, so that now when I save this and we preview in Firefox, now you'll see the relationship of each of these elements are the same to one another, but notice that as I drag this out, it centers as the browser enlarges. Now, that's one of the things with AP divs you cannot do. When I do this, they just stay put. They're absolutely they're positioned. Okay, so let's let's open the resume page, and let's start to lay this page out. Only this will be a little bit different. We're going to start by using tables, and there's a way that we can do this. An easy way, a hard way. I'm going to start with a really crude way first, or simple way, and then we'll work later. What do I want to do? I'm going to go back to common, and you'll see here before just right after the anchor is a table. And to insert a table, you just simply click. And you can use the 3 rows, 3 columns by default, or you can put in as many rows or columns as you want from here. You can also determine the table width from here, whether you want it in absolute pixels, or percentage. So let's start with percentage, and I don't want it 700%. I want it maybe 75%. And I'll show you the difference. It, by default, gives you a border. I'm not real crazy about borders again. But if you do not want borders, we can always change it, and you can set it to none. We're not going to use a header right now, but for tables with content, like if it were a list of items that you were selling, or was, you know, for that sort of thing, you would want a header that describes what this table is for. You could also have captions as well and a summary for it. And these are used again for accessibility issues, so that when the reader sees the table, it gives them a summary of what's in here, because it will have difficulty. So that is one reason that they're leaving that out. Tables still have to be used, though, even with CSS. It's hard not to. Click OK, and there's my table. Okay. Now, I don't know what happened to. Let me undo that. Oh, I know why. I think I'm going to hit down like so, and I'm going to press again the table, and I'm just going to use that default setting. Boom. Now let's decide, for example, I want to go ahead and I'm going to take these links. And it's not a bad idea if you choose to use images for links, or if you use flash buttons for links, that you also have text links at the bottom of the page in the event that people have images turned off or don't have access to flash. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this and paste it down here. And within that cell, I'll go ahead and I'll place it so that it's centered. Now let's say at the top, I decide, see, this is an example of it shrinking and expanding. Notice how the cells are expanding and shrinking as I put content. So for example, if I go ahead and I put the duck image in the upper left-hand corner, it's going to stretch that out and shrink the others. So it can be very awkward working this way. So I'll go ahead and select here the image, and I'm going to select the duck JPEG. I'm going to choose it. And this is a nice feature of, not what I was thinking of. Typically with Dreamweaver, if you incorporate an image or an element into your website that is not in your root folder, it will tell you, you know what, this is not in your root folder. Would you like to place a copy of it in there now? And you would normally say yes. But it says the file you've selected already, would you like to overwrite this file? No. So now I'm looking in my root folder, and here's the ducky JPEG, and I don't know why it's not there. It's there, but it's not there. Oh, it says save, so let me cancel. Cancel. There it is. It was in there already. Now let's go ahead. As I said, you don't want to do this, but I shrink it down like so. And by default, it places it in the center. Then you have to decide you want it flush left. You also have to decide alignment. Maybe I want it along the top, you know. And it's starting to look, I mean, I'm organizing it, but it's not as elegant as the other way. It's more difficult to control. Then maybe some text over here. Notice how it's changing it as I move around. Very aggravating and frustrating if you're used to desktop publishing. Extremely aggravating and frustrating. Now I can begin to place more and more content in here and organize accordingly, but it's structuring it. Now watch what happens when I preview in browser. So let me save it. Preview in Firefox. Notice the ugly borders. And notice how it changes because I put in a percentage, a 75%. It's always 75%. So that can be disastrous too if you're not careful. There are layouts that lend themselves to this kind of flexibility. But if you don't like this, then you can always come back down here, select the table, and you can switch from 75% to pixels, and you can decide, okay, I want it 700. 700 pixels, and then that will remain fixed. And then you can also specify again with the selecting the table again, you can specify whether you want the alignment to be default, left, centered, right, whatever, relative to the browser. If you do not want the borders to be visible, then you select the table, and where it says border 1, you have to type in 0 and hit return. And then in layout, or in the design mode here, you see the little perforated lines that indicate where it is, but then it also will, when you preview it or you see it in a browser, you will not see that structure. It will be underlined. Now, there's a lot more about tables that need to be said about when I select a table, for example. Whoops, let me just select the table itself. Cell padding and cell spacing are something that we need to pay attention to. Each of the cells can have, and I'll talk about it on another day, but I'm running out of time for my video. But for each of the cells, they can be a different background color. You can put background images in the table that lie behind the text, that lie behind an image that's placed in it. You can have background images and background color. If you do like borders, they can be a different color. So if I specify that it's border 1, I like big fat borders. I can come in here, I can specify a border color. I can make it red. And then when you preview it, you'll see a red border around it. So you can change all of those properties. And in some instances, it is necessary. So this would be another way to organize your page. Now, for me, if I go back to my website to show you where I've used some of these features, if I go back to kmart66.com, actually I can do that from here, can I? Oh, yeah. On my personal website, just to show you, and I admittedly did some of this a long time ago, and I just didn't have the desire to change it. But for example, if I go to my resume page, I laid this out with the intent of making it look very similar to the way I would lay it out in print. So I structured it by using a table. But now you would have to do it, a better way would probably be CSS, where you would have, this is a subhead, this lies at a specific location, this maybe is another piece of text that starts at a certain place and aligns itself, or it could be in separate divs too. So there's a variety of ways that this could be laid out in CSS, but I just left it in a table. That it's, to organize it this way with just HTML is not so easy. And not so long ago, tables were the way to go. Not so anymore. But you can still use tables in order to do this. This would be a good example of laying out a lot of text in a specific way using tables. Yes?
When you say a laid out in HTML, what do you mean?
Well, this would be HTML. Actually, the table is part of it is HTML. CSS, now, you still have your content, or the structure, which is HTML, or their content, which is HTML, and the structure would be determined by CSS. That would be the visuals. It would determine the color of the text, the location of the text, the font that you use, all of that sort of thing.
So when you're saying...
So the only way I'm using CSS here is determine the way the links appear. The size, the font. Notice that the rollover effect, when you roll over it, you see the underline. That's the only place I'm using it on mine.
That one page is one table, right? It's not a combination of tables.
It's one table, right? It's just one table. You can nest tables, put a table in a table. I guess you could put a table and a table and a table. Not a good idea, but you could.
So like you showed us, you laid it out visually and then converted it to table.
Actually, with this, I started with a table because it followed a pretty rigid grid.
Now that we're looking at your source code, it says frame set.
The reason that it says that you're seeing a frame set is because I use web masking from GoDaddy.
So
And GoDaddy puts my entire table or my entire page in a frame set. If on the other hand, if you were to go to,
are there any areas there that will within the frame set?
no, they use that to, because if you look at the page source, that's all you see is a frame. That's all you see is a frame set. You don't see the content in there, do you?
Yeah.
So, but on the other hand, if I were to go to home.earthlink.net/tilde-kmart66 to look at one of my older ones, older pages, and now if we were to go to view page source, now you see. This is the table. Here's the table data. And again, you see how the page is structured in here.
So what you have right here is that the code itself is not what you see on
If you want to, well, no, this is,
that is your Earthlink.
the frame, right, but well, because I'm using GoDaddy, and I could turn off web masking. I think that's what it's called. And then you would see this code. But web masking is a way of protecting, and I didn't do it with that intent because I don't care if people use my images or my content. It's a way of protecting your images, or protecting your files. And what they do, you're right, they put it in a frame set. Frame sets just aren't used anymore. They were used a lot for quite a while. And they're still used for that, mostly for masking. You will also discover in your tripod account that they're putting your page in a frame set. And that's for another day. I'll probably talk about frame sets very briefly. They look like tables, but they're actually separate pages. So we'll do more of this Thursday, but for today it's inserting text, and as you edit the text, it creates styles. The styles are, Dreamweaver is generating the CSS for those styles. And then some basic layout techniques, the older style techniques that we will do CSS layout when we get to CS4 after spring break. I know, awkward, but they have a tutorial in the book that I've asked everybody to get that allows you to follow that format, that we create a new file, and then I guess I can start here. Let me go ahead and turn off. That's this for today, and I'll show you the direction that we're going to go.
That's okay. Actually, it also shows the link to your page.
Okay.